Flight attendant slaps black woman unaware she's the billionaire that owns the planet. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden sheen over the private jet that sat glistening on the tarmac. The aircraft was no ordinary plane. It was a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, designed for those who had reached the pinnacle of success. Inside, the ambiance was immaculate. Plush leather seats, gold-accented finishes, and an air of quiet opulence that promised a journey of indulgence. Passengers boarded leisurely, their polished designer luggage rolling smoothly behind them. Some were engaged in hushed conversations, others scrolling through their devices or sipping on the champagne offered by the attentive flight crew. This was not just any flight. This was a curated experience, a privilege reserved for a select few. Among those boarding was Naomi Williams. She moved with quiet confidence, her presence exuding an understated elegance. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer with matching slacks, her posture was upright, her pace unhurried. She did not wear ostentatious jewelry, nor did she flaunt wealth. Yet she commanded attention without a single word. She was here for business, not indulgence. A trip to oversee operations for one of the many enterprises she had built from the ground up. Yet she preferred anonymity over the years. Naomi had learned that in certain spaces, wealth alone did not command respect. Perception did, and today, perception would be tested. As she stepped into the cabin, she immediately noticed the shift in energy, not from the passengers, but from one particular crew member. Lauren Reed, the lead flight attendant, stood near the entrance, her uniform impeccably tailored, her posture rigid with the authority she carried. Her gaze moved swiftly over each passenger, her greetings warm and welcoming. As Naomi approached, Lauren's expression shifted. The smile she had flashed so effortlessly at the elderly couple ahead of her dissolved into a polite but cold mask. Her eyes scanned Naomi in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable. Not with Naomi in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable. Not with evaluation. Lauren had worked for years to secure this position. She had mastered the art of hospitality, but more importantly, she had mastered the art of judgment, knowing instantly who was worthy of special treatment and who was not. And something about Naomi didn't sit right with her. Perhaps it was the way she walked with such composure, or the way she did not seek validation from those around her. Lauren had seen plenty of well-dressed passengers, but Naomi's presence did not fit the mold of someone who belonged here. She cleared her throat before speaking. "Welcome aboard," she said, her tone clipped, professional, but lacking the warmth she had offered to the others. Naomi noticed, but she did not react. Years of navigating such interactions had taught her the power of silence and observation. She gave a polite nod and moved forward to take her seat. Behind her, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, a well-traveled couple in their 60s, boarded. Lauren's demeanor transformed in an instant. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond," she beamed, her voice taking on a note of familiarity. "Lovely to have you with us again." Naomi did not need to turn around to understand what had just happened. The contrast was glaring, but she remained composed, settling into her seat with the quiet dignity that had carried her through a lifetime of challenges. As the final passengers took their places, the cabin settled into a hushed rhythm. Soft instrumental music played in the background. The scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the faintest trace of vanilla from the leather seats. Yet beneath this tranquility, Naomi could feel the undercurrent of something unspoken. The kind of energy she had encountered too many times before. She glanced up and caught Lauren watching her from the corner of her eye. The flight attendant's expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness in her posture, as if she was waiting for something. Naomi had seen this before. She knew exactly what was coming. Lauren moved methodically down the aisle, ensuring that each first-class passenger was comfortable. She offered polite conversation, smiled generously, adjusted seatbelts, fluffed pillows. But when she reached Naomi, her demeanor hardened. She paused, looked at Naomi's neatly stowed bag, and then, with a thinly veiled edge to her voice, she spoke. "Excuse me, Mom," she said, her words deliberately slow. A ripple of silence passed through the cabin. A businessman seated across the aisle briefly looked up from his laptop. A socialite in designer heels leaned ever so slightly forward, curiosity flickering across her face. Naomi turned her gaze upward, meeting Lauren's eyes with a calm steadiness. "No, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied evenly. Lauren's lips pressed into a tight line. "This section is reserved for our elite passengers," she clarified, as if Naomi had simply misunderstood. There it was. The assumption, the presumption. Naomi had encountered countless Laurens in her life, in boardrooms, in high-end stores, in exclusive social circles. They came in different forms, but their message was always the same. You don't belong here. This time, she would not let it slide. You might want to double. Check your passenger list before making assumptions, Naomi said, her voice as smooth as silk, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. Lauren's brows arched, a flicker of irritation flashing across her face. "I don't need to check anything," she said, her tone sharpening. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The silence in the cabin deepened. Passengers exchanged glances. A murmur passed between two women seated near the window. The businessman across the aisle furrowed his brow, closing his laptop. This was no longer just an interaction. This was a confrontation. Lauren stood firm, arms crossed, the authority in her posture unwavering. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," she said, her voice now deliberately loud enough for others to hear, "I will have to call security." Naomi did not flinch. She did not waver. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, her eyes unwavering, her voice steady. "Call whoever you need to," she said. "But I'm not moving." The socialite gasped softly. The businessman sat up straighter. And Lauren had no idea what she had just walked into. The cabin air was thick with an unspoken tension. Naomi's unwavering gaze met Lauren's, two opposing forces locked in a silent battle of will. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, caught between intrigue and unease. Some whispered in hushed tones, others pretended not to notice, but no one could ignore what was unfolding. Lauren's face remained impassive, but beneath her controlled exterior, frustration simmered. She had expected compliance. She had expected Naomi to lower her gaze, to move without question. Instead, she was met with calm defiance, a refusal that both irritated and unsettled her. Lauren's voice rose again, firmer this time. "I'll say this once more. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." A dramatic silence followed. And then Naomi smiled. It wasn't an amused smile. It wasn't condescending. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who had seen this before and knew exactly how it would end. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her voice smooth as silk. "Call whoever you need to." Her words were soft, but they carried an unmistakable weight, the weight of someone with nothing to prove, yet everything under control. Lauren's eyes narrowed. She turned sharply, glancing toward the junior flight attendant, Grace, who'd been watching the exchange with growing unease. "Grace," Lauren snapped, her tone edged with impatience. "Escort her to the back." Grace hesitated. She had been with this airline for only a few months. She had seen Lauren exert authority over passengers before. But something about this situation felt different. There was something about Naomi, her confidence, her unshaken demeanor, that made Grace pause. Still, Lauren's sharp glare left no room for questioning. "Now, Grace." Swallowing hard, the young flight attendant took a cautious step forward. But before she could say a word, Naomi spoke again. This time, lower, slower, deliberate. "I'd be very careful about what you do next." Lauren scoffed. "Are you threatening my staff now?" Naomi's expression remained unreadable. "No. I'm giving you an opportunity to rethink your mistake." A flicker of doubt crossed Grace's face. She knew the airline's policy required them to check the passenger manifest before removing anyone. Why wasn't Lauren checking? Grace's fingers trembled as she reached for the clipboard near the cockpit door. She glanced at Lauren nervously before daring to scan the list. Her heart thudded as she read the names. And then her breath hitched. There it was. Naomi Williams. Seated in first class, exactly where she was supposed to be. Grace's eyes darted toward Lauren. She saw the name. She knew the truth. But could she say it? The tension in the cabin continued to mount as passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A well-dressed socialite leaned toward her equally polished friend. "She's probably trying to get an upgrade," she whispered, her voice just loud enough to be heard. Across the aisle, a businessman frowned at the comment, his grip tightening on the armrest. "Or," he countered, voice measured but firm, "maybe she actually belongs here, and someone just doesn't want to believe it." The socialite scoffed, but said nothing more. Lauren, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the shifting sentiments around her. Her authority had never been questioned before. Why should it start now? She turned back to Naomi, folding her arms across her chest. "Let me be clear, ma'am. You're causing a disturbance. If you refuse to move, I will have you forcibly removed from this plane." Naomi let out a soft breath, tilting her head slightly. "You still don't get it, do you?" Lauren's smirk widened, confidence returning to her stance. "Oh, I get it." She let out a small laugh. "You think if you hold your ground long enough, I'll back down. I'll back down. I won't. I've dealt with people like you before." The words hung in the air like poison. Naomi's expression didn't change, but inside, something shifted. It happened in an instant. Lauren turned to move past Naomi, a tray in hand. At the last second, she changed her path ever so slightly. Her foot collided with Naomi's leg. The tray tilted. Water splashed on Naomi's lap. A few passengers gasped. The businessman across the aisle stood abruptly. Lauren, however, let out a theatrical sigh, placing a hand on her hip. "Well," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "maybe if you weren't sticking your legs in the aisle, this wouldn't have happened." Silence. Naomi slowly looked down at the wet fabric of her trousers. Then she looked up at Lauren, and this time her voice held a quiet warning. "You should stop while you still can." Lauren laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, please." She rolled her eyes. "You think you can intimidate me?" Naomi slowly set her hands on the armrests, her posture as composed as ever. "I don't need to intimidate you," she said softly. "I'm simply giving you the opportunity to walk away from this with your dignity intact." Lauren's smirk faltered for half a second. A second too late. Because that's when the slap happened. Sharp, loud, unmistakable. It echoed through the cabin as passengers audibly gasped. The businessman took a step forward, his face a mixture of shock and anger. Grace covered her mouth with both hands, horror flashing in her wide eyes. Even the socialite, who had, moments ago, been so sure Naomi didn't belong, stared in stunned silence. Lauren, and realizing too late what she had just done. Her breath quickened, her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. And Naomi simply straightened. She slowly turned her head back to Lauren, expression unreadable. And then she spoke. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." The weight of those words crashed over Lauren like a tidal wave. For the first time, her confidence wavered. A beat of silence. And then, Naomi reached for her phone. A simple motion, nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. But it was deliberate. Lauren watched as Naomi typed something swiftly, her fingers moving effortlessly across the screen. Then, she set the phone down on the armrest beside her. The businessman inhaled sharply, realization dawning on him first. The socialite leaned forward, whispering to her friend. "Wait, what if she's—" Lauren swallowed hard. For the first time, a sliver of fear crept into her expression. She had just put her hands on a passenger in first class, and something about the way Naomi sat, calm, composed, unshaken, made her realize the truth was about to come crashing down. And when it did, Lauren would be the one who didn't belong. The slap had changed everything. It wasn't just an act of aggression. It was an irreversible mistake, one that shattered the illusion of authority Lauren had built around herself. The cabin was silent, save for the soft hum of the engines. Passengers sat frozen, their gazes darting between Lauren and Naomi, as if waiting for the moment the world would tilt on its axis. Lauren's own breath hitched, her hand trembling slightly from the force of the impact she had just delivered. She had crossed a line, and for the first time, she knew it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You think you can threaten me?" Lauren hissed, her voice lower now, filled with panic disguised as defiance. "You're causing a disturbance on my plane." Naomi slowly lifted her chin, her fingers calmly brushing over her cheek where the sting of Lauren's slap lingered. "Your plane?" Lauren's stomach twisted, but she refused to acknowledge the growing unease creeping into her bones. "Yes." She straightened her posture, regaining whatever ounce of control she still had. "And if you don't move, I'll have security escort you off the aircraft the moment we land." Naomi smiled. It was subtle, knowing, the kind of smile that precedes an inevitable reckoning. Lauren's confidence faltered. Why is she so calm? Then, the first real sign of trouble came, not from Naomi, but from Grace. The junior flight attendant, who had been clutching the passenger manifest, looked pale. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the clipboard. Her eyes darted between Naomi's name and Lauren's furious face. She knew what was coming, and she knew Lauren was about to realize it too. A few passengers exchanged whispered theories. The businessman sat forward, hands clasped, his eyes sharp with suspicion. No. Realization. And then the footsteps came. The cockpit door swung open. The pilot stepped out, his crisp uniform impeccable, his face unreadable. He scanned the room. And then his eyes landed on Naomi. Something in his expression shifted, recognition, respect. Lauren turned, expecting to see an ally, someone who would reinforce her authority, who would help her put Naomi in her place, once and for all. Instead, the moment she met the pilot's gaze, her stomach twisted into a knot. His face was tight with discomfort.
His stance rigid.
He wasn't here to back her up. Lauren's mouth opened, but before she could speak, the pilot turned to her with a measured tone. Step aside. Lauren blinked. Excuse me. The pilot's jaw tensed. Step aside. A murmur rippled through the passengers. The businessman leaned back in his seat, exhaling softly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Lauren's breath turned shallow. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She forced a laugh, one that fell flat against the thick air of tension surrounding her. Captain, Now, the pilot interrupted, his voice stern. Lauren hesitated, but the final blow came when he turned to Naomi. And with absolute clarity, he spoke the words that turned Lauren's world upside down. Miss Williams, we sincerely apologize for this incident. We were not aware you were on board. The reaction was immediate. The socialite gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The businessman nodded knowingly. And Lauren took a step back, her vision blurring. No. Miss Williams, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to Grace, to the clipboard, to anything that might prove this was all a misunderstanding. But there was no mistake. Right there, printed in bold black ink, was the name Naomi Williams. And next to it, a designation that made Lauren's blood turn cold. Owner. Naomi didn't just belong in first class. She owned the entire airline. A low hum of shock and whispers spread like wildfire across the cabin. The socialite, who had been convinced Naomi was just an imposter, looked mortified. The businessman simply crossed his arms, as if this had confirmed everything he had suspected all along. And Lauren, her entire world had just collapsed. The color drained from her face as her knees nearly buckled beneath her. She had humiliated the most powerful person on this plane. And now, she was at her mercy. Naomi remained seated, still composed, her expression unchanged. She turned her gaze toward Lauren, not with anger, not with triumph, but with quiet authority. You assumed, Lauren. Lauren's breath came in short, panicked bursts. You judged me before knowing who I was. You treated me differently, spoke down to me, and put your hands on me because you thought I didn't belong. Naomi's voice remained steady, her words deliberate. You let your prejudice dictate your actions. And now you will face the consequences. Lauren shook her head rapidly. Miss Williams, I swear, I didn't. Naomi raised a hand, a simple motion, but it silenced Lauren immediately. Then she turned to the pilot. Effective immediately, I want her removed from my airline. Lauren's heart stopped. The pilot nodded without hesitation. Lauren staggered back. Wait, please, But before she could plead further, the cockpit radio crackled to life. Cabin crew, prepare for an unscheduled landing. The descent was smooth, but Lauren's fall from power was anything but. When the plane touched down, a black SUV awaited on the tarmac, sleek and unyielding. The doors opened, and two sharply dressed security officers stepped out. Lauren's breathing hitched. One of them stepped forward. "Miss Williams, we're here per your request." Lauren's lips quivered. "Please, don't do this." Naomi met her gaze, calm, collected, final. "I didn't do this to you, Lauren. You did this to yourself." Lauren's body slumped as security escorted her off the plane. The passengers watched, some in stunned silence, others murmuring amongst themselves. Naomi remained seated, unbothered, flipping through her phone as if nothing had happened. She had won, but more importantly, she had set an example. Respect is not a privilege, it is a right. And on her airline, it would be enforced. This section delivers the major twist and fallout, expanding on the pilot's entrance and Lauren's slow realization of the truth. The passengers' shifting reactions, from doubt to admiration. Naomi's ultimate decision, exacting justice, not revenge. Lauren's dramatic removal from the airline. Lauren's departure was absolute. The once confident, sharp-tongued flight attendant was now a shadow of herself, escorted off the aircraft by security. Passengers watched in stunned silence as she stepped down the stairs, her posture no longer proud but slumped. A woman who had gambled everything on arrogance and lost. Naomi remained seated, unbothered, unmoved. But even as Lauren disappeared, Naomi knew this moment wasn't just about one person. This was about a system, a pattern of behavior that went unchecked, and that was about to change. The aircraft took off once more, the tension still lingering but transformed. No longer about uncertainty, but about realization. People exchanged quiet words, some stealing glances at Naomi, who sat serene, flipping through her phone as though nothing had happened. The businessman leaned forward. "Miss Williams, if I may." Naomi looked up, raising a brow. "Yes?" He hesitated. "The way you handled that." Naomi smiled faintly. "I don't let ignorance determine my worth." He nodded, respect clear in his eyes. More people need to hear this. Naomi inhaled deeply, tapping on her phone. More people would, because she wasn't just going to handle the situation. She was going to fix it. She sent a quick message to her peer team. "I want this addressed publicly. A full statement. And changes to policy." The response was immediate. Understood. Naomi was about to turn a moment of humiliation into a movement of empowerment. By the time the plane landed at its final destination, the story had already broken online. A passenger had recorded the incident, and now it was spreading like wildfire. Billionaire Naomi Williams, mistaken for an imposter on her own plane. Her response shocks the world. Flight attendant fired after assaulting airline owner. What happened next was unbelievable. Respect above all trends as passengers speak out on luxury space discrimination. Naomi's social media notifications flooded in. Thousands, millions. Some were messages of support, admiration, outrage, but most were filled with stories. "This happened to me at a luxury store. I was treated the same way in a hotel. I wish I had handled it like you did." It wasn't just her story anymore. It was everyone's story. Naomi didn't just let the incident fade. She took action. New anti-discrimination training. Every employee, from flight attendants to executives, would undergo bias training to ensure that respect was given to all passengers, regardless of appearance. Passenger complaint protocol. Any passenger who experienced discrimination would have a direct line to Naomi's executive office. No case would be ignored. Leadership restructure. She ordered a full audit of employee conduct, ensuring that people like Lauren wouldn't have unchecked power over others. Public accountability. In an interview, she spoke directly to the public. Days later, Naomi sat in a sleek TV studio, a famous journalist across from her. The cameras rolled live. "Miss Williams," the journalist began, leaning forward, "your story has reached millions. What message do you want to send?" Naomi's expression was steady, her voice unwavering. "Respect is not a privilege." The journalist nodded. "And what would you say to those who have experienced something similar?" Naomi exhaled, thinking of every moment in her life where she had been judged before being known. "I would say this. You don't need to be a billionaire to demand respect. You just need to stand firm in who you are. Change starts with people who refuse to be silent." The audience erupted into applause. Naomi hadn't just defended herself. She had started a revolution. A few weeks later, Naomi boarded another flight. A different crew, a different energy. The lead flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. It's an honor to have you." Naomi returned the smile. The air was different. The respect was different. The world was different. She settled into her seat, gazing out the window as the runway blurred into the sky. As the engines hummed, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the most powerful victories aren't about winning. They're about inspiring change. And Naomi Williams had done just that.